In 2005, I was subjected to a brutal psychological experiment. For 3.5 months, I was put into solitary confinement. I had to sleep on a bunk, not very much wider than my body. I was allowed one short phone call a day, and for the last 24 days, even that privilege was revoked. I had no books, no music, and no TV, nothing to entertain me apart from my own thoughts. And obviously, I'm a very entertaining person, but even I was pretty sick of myself by the end of the first 2 weeks. So, how did I allow this to happen? Was I being paid an enormous amount of money to undertake this experiment? No, in fact, I paid a lot of money to do it. In case you haven't guessed already, I was actually rowing solo across the Atlantic Ocean. This 23-foot rowboat was my solitary confinement. But it was brutal, and it was very psychological. I had to find a way to deal with the stress of this extremely new and unfamiliar situation. I'd spent 11 years as a management consultant before this, which had not really equipped me for what was to turn out to be the worst year since records began for weather on the Atlantic Ocean. Something I had to figure out quite early on was how to suppress that stress, because when we get stressed, the adrenaline starts pumping. And you know those little voices in your head that can be a problem at the best of times, especially when you're alone. We have this tendency to negativity, the negativity bias, which is kind of an evolutionary thing because it pays us much better to pay attention to problems than to pay attention to all the stuff that's going really well, which is why if you're getting feedback and you have one negative comment and 9 good ones, it's the one bad one that sticks in your memory. So as I'm there on my own in this rowboat, I feel like there's this mutiny going on in my head. All those little voices, some of them saying, you've got to row fast to get to the other side. Other voices going, no, you're feeling kind of tired, have a little break. When stress was added into that mix, it was like those voices had 6 cans of Red Bull. Suddenly they're all running around, counteracting each other, and it made it very difficult to function. And when you're alone on a rowboat, you really don't get the chance to make second mistakes. So I had to learn how to control my response to this situation, because this is the good news. No matter what is going on around you, no matter what your stress is coming from, whether it's final exams or a new job or an impossibly large challenge, you can always choose your response. I think of it like this. We all have a circle of things that we can control. Outside of that, a circle of influence. And outside of that, everything else is things that we can't control. By the way, most people in your world will be outside what you can control, and any efforts to try and control them will probably backfire. Early on in the voyage, I had made some mistakes in which of these domains I allocated certain things to. Like, for example, the ocean. Now, the ocean seemed to have a malicious will all of its own. It somehow knew the worst moments to come along and slop a wave over me. After my camping stove broke about 3 weeks into the voyage, I had to eat all my freeze-dried meals cold, which I wouldn't recommend. You can still rehydrate freeze-dried meals with cold water, but instead of them rehydrating in 10 minutes, it takes a good couple of hours for them to rehydrate. So after 2 hours of sitting there watching my meal rehydrating, not a great spectator sport, but I was really looking forward to this meal. I was sitting there rowing along, looking forward to my freeze-dried whatever it is. And then I just finished my rowing shift and sat down to exhale and enjoy my delicious cold chili con carne when a wave would just know to come along and slop itself right into my mug of dinner. It just seemed to know what to do. And early on, I took this very personally. It's like, why is the ocean being so mean to me? And it took me a while to figure out the ocean was just doing what oceans do. It was outside of my control. And I had to just get on and do what ocean rowers are supposed to do, which is to keep sticking the oars in the water and stop whinging. As I see it, there are 3 different domains within our circle of control. There's our work, there's our circumstances, and there's ourselves. As an example of my work, to go back to my voyage, it's really important in the way that you're going to respond to your work that you frame your job description in a way that really means something to you, something that's going to be challenging enough to allow you that acquisition of mastery, but also doable. It should be at the upper end of your capabilities. Unfortunately, at the start of my voyage, I made the mistake of looking at the whole 3,000 miles that lay ahead of me between the Canaries and Antigua in the Caribbean. And there is nothing more guaranteed to make you melt down into a completely demotivated mess than having a massively overwhelming goal. And so I learned the hard way that I had to break it down into more manageable chunks, to take it to the next degree of longitude, or the next day, or the next hour, or sometimes just the next 10 oar strokes at a time. My circumstances. You can choose how you perceive your circumstances by reframing it if you're not liking the way your circumstances are looking. So as an example of that, there's one day I'm rowing along miserably, I've got tendinitis in my shoulders, I've got saltwater sores on my bottom, my sleeping bag is damp, just everything is massively, massively uncomfortable. I can see there's a very good reason that more people don't live on rowboats. And I'm whinging away, it's all so uncomfortable. And suddenly that word, uncomfortable, triggered a memory. And I recalled that in the run-up to the voyage, whenever a journalist or anybody else asked me why I was doing this, I would say, I want to get outside my comfort zone to find out what I can do. And unfortunately, I'd forgotten that getting outside your comfort zone is, by definition, going to be uncomfortable. And so when I flipped it around like that, I realized that the discomfort didn't mean I was failing, it actually meant I was succeeding in what I'd set out to do. And from that point on, I was able to be much more cheerfully miserable. And finally, in theory, we are able to control ourselves. Now, frankly, I'm not quite so sure about this. I mean, there are endless psychological studies showing how we are not as rational and calm as we think we are, and that the massive elephant of our subconscious has got this poor little puny rider of our conscious mind trying to control it. But I think there are some ways that we can change our stories. First of all, so many of the things that we worry and stress about don't happen. As Mark Twain said, I've had many worries in my life, and most of them never happened. I know certainly on the ocean, I sometimes got a bit carried away thinking about all the problems that might arise between where I was and where I was going to end up. And that way lies madness. A lot of them are very trivial. I mean, there's enough really big problems going on in the world right now with environmental destruction and social inequality and human rights violations. Why are we spending so much time worrying about keeping up with the Joneses, the acquisition and maintenance and transportation of stuff? I mean, let's just keep things simple. Let's stop sweating the small stuff and sweat the really big stuff. And finally, doing something like rowing across an ocean is like the opposite of instant gratification. Captain Webb, the first guy to swim across the channel, said, "Nothing great is ever easy." So in fact, when you're going through a difficult, stressful situation, it's possible sometimes to see it as that creative stress. You're being challenged to try something new. It means that you're growing, that you're pushing your boundaries, you're getting outside your comfort zone. And that's the only way that you're going to keep developing as a person. So there's actually a different kind of stress that psychologists call eustress. That's EU stress, not YOU stress. And it means that you're actually in the zone. You're flowing, you're learning. So you can actually, while you're reframing your situation, you can actually reframe stress itself. I think there are a lot of people for whom their circle of control doesn't even extend as far as the boundary of themselves. And it's really only through doing this work of looking inside, of becoming more self-aware of our drivers and the tricks that our psychology will try and play on us, that we actually become wiser in the way that we show up in the world. That, you know, for many people, they seem to be so much at the behest of their emotions and their irrationalities, that their circle of control is like a tiny little dot inside that. And it's by doing that inner work that you can grow your circle of control until you become the master of yourself. I'd just like to finish up by reciting the last two lines from one of my favourite poems. In front of my rowing seat, as I was out there on the ocean, I had a whiteboard on which I would write up inspirational quotes, or I would write up the next 100 miles as being my next target. And I had a number of poems. I particularly liked Max Ehrmann's Desiderata and Rudyard Kipling's If. But actually, one of my favourites was Invictus by William Ernest Henley. And even the name itself means unbowed, unconquered, indomitable. And the last two lines of that are, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And my belief is that when you look inside, develop that inner strength, burnish your soul in the crucible of a really challenging situation, you will be so much more powerful in the world. Not only does your circle of control grow, but your circle of influence will also grow as people respect you as someone who understands their own motivations. So, be the master of your fate, be the captain of your soul, go forth and be powerful in the world. Thank you.